It was a quiet life, but a fulfilling one. I had raised Ethan, my only son, with all the love and care I could muster after losing his father years ago. He was my pride, my joy, my reason to keep going when life felt too heavy. Ethan wasn't just a son to me. He was my confidant, my companion. People always said he was a reflection of me. Polite, hardworking, and compassionate. We shared a small, modest home in the heart of a peaceful town. Days were predictable but comforting. I spent my time teaching at the local school, and Ethan, now in college, juggled his studies and a part-time job. He'd often come home late, tired but still flashing me a warm smile that melted away any worries. He was my everything, and I thought I was his. One evening, Ethan came home looking unusually excited. "Mom," he began, a hint of nervousness in his tone, "I want you to meet someone." My heart fluttered. It wasn't every day that Ethan introduced me to anyone outside his small circle of friends. Her name was Lila. She was beautiful, with a soft voice and an easy charm that immediately drew people in. She had an air of mystery about her, though, something I couldn't quite place. Still, Ethan's face lit up around her, and that was enough for me to push aside my unease. If she made my son happy, then who was I to question it? The days that followed brought small changes, ones I noticed but tried not to dwell on. Ethan started spending more time with Lila, which was natural for a young man in love. Yet there were moments when his attention seemed elsewhere, even when we sat together for our usual dinners. He'd nod and smile at my stories, but his mind was clearly miles away. Then there were the late nights. At first, he'd text me to say he was studying with friends or working extra hours. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He'd never given me a reason to doubt him. But as the weeks went by, those late nights became more frequent, and his explanations grew vaguer. One evening, while we were having tea, I noticed a faint perfume clinging to his jacket. It wasn't Lila's scent. I remembered hers from the day we met. This one was different, unfamiliar. I asked him about it, and he laughed it off, saying a coworker must have accidentally brushed past him. His smile was so convincing, but my heart felt a small, unfamiliar crack forming. Still, I said nothing. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe this was just the natural course of a boy growing into a man, finding his place in the world. I wanted to trust him, to believe that the bond we shared was unshakable. Little did I know, the foundation I had built my life on was about to tremble. Ethan's behavior began to change in ways I couldn't ignore. The boy who once told me everything now seemed like a stranger in the same house. He spent more time on his phone, his laughter muffled behind closed doors. Dinner conversations became one-sided. I'd talk while he nodded absent-mindedly, his mind clearly elsewhere. When he stayed out late, his reasons became vague. Just with some friends, he'd say, or had to finish a group project. I wanted to believe him, but his excuses were beginning to sound rehearsed, like he was reciting lines he had practiced. One evening, as I was walking back from the market, I saw her, Lila. She was sitting outside a cafe, but she wasn't alone. A man sat across from her, leaning in too close, his smile too familiar. Lila's face was turned away, but her body language was unmistakable, nervous, uncomfortable. She looked up, saw me, and froze. Her expression shifted so quickly it was as if a mask had been ripped away. Without a word, she excused herself and left, leaving the man behind. When Ethan came home that night, I wanted to ask him about her, to share what I had seen. But the words wouldn't come. I didn't want to accuse her without proof, and more than that, I didn't want to shatter the trust between us. So, I stayed quiet, telling myself there must be a reasonable explanation. Then came the night he told me he wouldn't be coming home. "It's late," he said, avoiding my eyes. "I'll just stay at a nearby hotel." It was the first time he'd ever done something like this. A part of me wanted to stop him, to ask why he couldn't just come home no matter the hour. But I didn't. I smiled, nodded, and told him to be safe. The next day, while cleaning his room, I found something that made my chest tighten. A hotel key card was tucked inside his jacket pocket. At first, I convinced myself it must be from the night before, but the logo was different from the hotel he mentioned. That, coupled with the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on his clothes, made my suspicions impossible to ignore. I told myself it wasn't what it seemed. Ethan would never lie to me, not like this. But the unease in my heart wouldn't go away. The boy I had raised, the one who used to share every little detail of his life with me, was slipping through my fingers. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing him. Not just to Lila, but to something darker, something I couldn't quite name yet. The cracks in our bond were growing wider, and I felt powerless to stop it. All I could do was hope that I was wrong, that this was all just a misunderstanding. But deep down I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. The unease gnawed at me until I couldn't bear it anymore. That night, after Ethan told me he'd be staying at a hotel again, I decided to follow him. I hated myself for it, for doubting him, for crossing a line I never thought I'd have to. But something deep inside urged me forward, a voice I couldn't silence. I waited until he left the house, and then followed at a distance. He didn't head toward the hotel he had mentioned before. Instead, he took a turn down a different road and stopped at a small boutique hotel on the outskirts of town. My heart sank. This wasn't a place you stayed for convenience or study sessions. I hesitated outside, debating whether I should confront him right then and there. But my legs moved on their own, carrying me inside. At the reception desk, I asked for Ethan, pretending I was there to deliver something he had forgotten. The receptionist glanced at me curiously before checking the records. "Room 214, she said casually. "Room 214. The number echoed in my mind as I climbed the stairs, my hands trembling. I wanted to stop, to turn around and leave, to pretend I didn't know what was happening. But I couldn't. I had to see for myself. When I reached the door, I hesitated. Voices filtered through the thin wood, a man and a woman, laughing softly. My heart pounded in my chest, every beat a painful reminder of what I was about to confirm. I raised my hand to knock but stopped, frozen by fear. Instead, I leaned closer, straining to hear. "Do you think she suspects anything?" It was Lila's voice, unmistakable even in a whisper. "She's my mom," Ethan replied. "She trusts me. She won't find out." I staggered back, my hand covering my mouth to stifle the gasp that escaped me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My Ethan, was lying to me, sneaking around behind my back. And Lila, the girl I had tried so hard to welcome into our lives, was complicit in it all. I didn't confront them that night. I couldn't. Instead, I walked home in a daze, the weight of their betrayal crushing me. Every step felt heavier than the last, my mind replaying their words over and over. When Ethan returned the next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He greeted me with the same warm smile that used to bring me so much comfort, but now it felt like a dagger twisting in my chest. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I held back. Later that evening, I finally gathered the courage to confront him. I told him I knew everything, that I had followed him, that I had heard their conversation. The look on his face was a mix of shock and guilt. He didn't deny it. Instead, he hung his head, mumbling apologies that felt hollow. In that moment, my heart broke, not just because of what he had done, but because of the realization that the bond we shared had been fractured in a way that might never heal. Ethan's confession hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. He admitted everything, the lies, the deception, and his feelings of guilt. He said he never intended to hurt me, but felt trapped, torn between his loyalty to me and his own desires. His voice wavered, but his words did little to ease the ache in my chest. I listened in silence, my emotions too tangled to unravel. Part of me wanted to shout, to demand how he could betray the trust we had built over a lifetime. Another part of me wanted to pull him into my arms, to comfort the boy who was clearly lost. But I did neither. I sat there, staring at the sun I thought I knew, and realized that we had both been holding on to an illusion. He spoke of how Lila had made him feel alive, like he could escape the expectations he felt weighed him down. "You've always been everything to me, Mom," he said, his voice cracking. But sometimes I just wanted to be something more than your son. I didn't know how to tell you. His words hurt, but they also gave me clarity. I had devoted my entire life to raising Ethan, to being his anchor, but in doing so, I had unknowingly become a tether he wanted to break free from. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but one I needed to accept. I told him how his actions had hurt me, how his lies had made me question everything I believed about our relationship. He listened quietly, tears streaming down his face. It wasn't easy for either of us, but it was a conversation we needed to have. I realized that while his betrayal had broken my heart, it hadn't shattered it completely. There was still love there, buried beneath the pain, waiting to be rebuilt. As for Lila, she came to see me a few days later. She looked different, less confident, more vulnerable. She apologized, saying she had never meant to come between us, but had gotten caught up in something she couldn't control. I didn't know whether to believe her, but I didn't have the energy to hold on to anger. "You should leave," I told her calmly. "For your sake and ours." She nodded, her eyes filled with regret, and walked away without another word. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and I began the slow process of rebuilding what had been broken. It wasn't easy. Trust, once shattered, doesn't mend overnight. But he really tried. He started spending more time at home, opening up to me about his thoughts and feelings in a way he hadn't in years. I, too, made changes. I stopped defining myself solely as his mother and started rediscovering the woman I used to be. I reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies I had long abandoned, and allowed myself to find joy outside of our relationship. In the end, the betrayal didn't destroy us. It changed us, yes, but it also gave us the chance to grow, to learn, and to move forward, together, but as individuals too. That was the hardest lesson of all, but perhaps the most important one.